Good morning to anybody who may listen today. I have so many things on my mind, and the things that I'd like to talk about, and yet I find it hard to organize a coherent uh, set of statements. The time seems to be moving so quickly, and there's a very unsettled air. I find it extremely distracting, and it's very hard to focus my attention on the many things that I really need to do, I think. Even my Bible reading has become very sort of flitting from chapter to chapter and between the Old and the New Testament and reading, a few verses here or a chapter here and then a chapter there, backwards and forwards all the time, and then not completing an entire book. That itself feels quite unsettling. I mean, I'm doing it because the points that are coming up are they're taking me here and they're taking me there. But at the same time, reading the Bible, I think, should have a calming influence on one's life, and also, whereas lately it's been firing me up just too much all the time, and the realizations that are coming to me and my frustration with the established church and with my peers and with my family also, having been recently described as a man who speaks nonsense and holds is an extremist, quite pejorative characterizations by my really one of my closest family members. And I am, I'm not happy about it, but there's just nothing you can do. There's nothing I can do because I never try to persuade people. I avoid persuading or people what is what in the world. But I think I have a right to share my understanding of many things. And my real desire is that people should just think for themselves, but they don't. They rely on third party sources always. This is the problem. This is the problem at the church where, I've always been critical of the gifts in the established church. Always. Once I realized what they were doing with the money that they collect. The old Plymouth Brethren derived church I used to attend would send it to the Christian Institute, I think it's called, which is a Christian advocacy group in London. And the church that I've attended from time to time now, they send it to the main humanitarian charities. And I was chatting yesterday to an elderly couple, very nice gentleman and his wife, who always sit at the end of the hall when they do the breakfasts, and they man a charity stall, and they sell bric-a-brac for for a few pounds. And I always go and chat to them, and I've sometimes bought a couple of little things off their stall. I bought a complete set of what are they called? Famous 5 books by Enid Blyton, and they were fairly dear, but not as dear as those things would be if they were actual originals. Sadly, they weren't. I suppose I didn't really think they were. They were paperbacks anyway, and they'd been edited, much to my disgust, to make them more politically correct when they were published, which was in I think about 1990, whereas they were originally published in the 1930s, I think, late 30s or before the war, I think. So that changed things. But I asked them about the charities, and they explained to me that this charity stall was their own initiative, and in agreement, I suppose, with the church. What do they call those people? The trustees. They've allowed them to run the stall, and they give everything that they make to charity, 100%. And so I inquired what charities they were, and do you have a list? I said. I mean, it's a bit cheeky, really, but we should think about those things. And they told me a few that I know, there is no charity that is, unfortunately, doing good work. There just isn't. And most of them are actively harming. And yet the church supports them. And so the church functions as a kind of a funnel for all charitable efforts across the country and across the world, you could say, drawing in funds. The Catholic Church is at it as well, probably far more efficiently. But they do okay also in the Anglican Church. And there's the army of volunteers, usually around about 10 people, I would say, working tirelessly from about 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, one day a week, for nothing, entirely free. And they become the church supporters, I suppose, the people who you might say, if you had any belief in works-based salvation, then you would say that they're closer to God than a lout like me just going down and having a sandwich or a bowl of soup. I'm always appreciative of their efforts, but I'm afraid that there is a measure of belief in works-based salvation, and I suppose people will quote that famous verse that says, "Faith without works is dead." So they think that works is a necessary part of it. But it's just a misunderstanding of what the Bible's actually speaking about, in my personal view. Works is always, sadly, carried out to promote to curry favor with the Almighty, almost. And so it's wickedness. It shows, I think it reveals pride in the heart that will separate people from God. If you believe, then the entirety of your life will be in a measure works, you could say, because everything that you do has to be or will be amplifying the glory of God. That's how it works. And that includes your own self-care, your own life, your attention to your physical and mental well-being, and your rest, and all these fine things. because you are following the instructions of, what do they call it, the inwrought Spirit, the inwrought Holy Ghost, that is to a certain measure directing your life, because you are loved. So your whole life is just praising God, really. But you will be hated for it, as it says in the Bible, and I am hated for it now by a very close and very dear family member. I don't think these people realize what they're saying. They just don't understand the nature of not just faith, but also wisdom. Because, of course, I'm considered to be a fool, whereas a wise person keeps their mouth closed a little bit and follows their betters, who can be found in the university colleges, in the high positions of society. And they have pronouncements, and they write books, and they go on television. And these are the people that, of course, you can see by how revered they are. These are the people of wisdom. Now, a very dear, now deceased relative was described recently to me as a wise old owl by an atheistic close relative also, as a wise old owl. Now, if you read the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, and the person in question has actually read them at my slightly odd request. Wisdom has nothing to do with owls, of course, but it is apparently popular among the Freemasons, the creature as a symbol of wisdom, whereas in the Bible an owl is a symbol of desolation, isn't it? Places that are abandoned, where they will be inhabited by the bittern and the owl, and I think dragons also will dwell there. It's certainly not a symbol of wisdom. The animal that is associated with wisdom in the Bible, of course, troublingly, you could say, is the snake, because there's the one verse where Jesus himself says that you are to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. Not troublingly, really, because that's why the satanic cult uses the snake, the serpent. It has that biblical association. They always mimic the Bible, and so Satan is described as a serpent in the Bible in Genesis. So that's the situation now, and it irks me to hear those things, and I find that I'm more disturbed by them than I should be, really, because the only answer is just has to be water off a duck's back, as they say. You just pay it no mind. But the trouble is that the truth is the truth, and the world is going to hell because they don't know the truth. They're going to hell. That's what the Bible teaches. And I see it around me. people who are locked in to the um, medical system that controls so much of the world, and wind up with cancer and wind up with this and wind up with that, and then they tell them that they need to have their joints replaced with titanium things, and so they become completely indentured to the healthcare system and tormented therein, sadly, not because of the doctors and nurses. I've spoken about this before, but because of the philosophy upon which it is built and its increasing ungodliness. The further you are away from God, then the greater the pain. So I would see it. But when you think about, the charities that are listed here, they give them to various places. They also donate to medical causes, and one of them was for the children born with a cleft palate. Apparently, there's a charity collecting for those children, and they will campaign among charitable organisations for donations because they seem to fit in with the general ethos of caring for others, I suppose you could say. But what happens to that money then? The whole medical field, of course, is fundamentally corrupt. And I have no idea what the cause of the cleft palate could be. But it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest to find that it has its origin in medical practice, or incorrect nutrition, and so on and so forth. So I don't support those charities at all. They're giving this money to these people, and then they're feeling good about it. But that's not really justified. They're wasting the money because the Bible teaches us that we are to invest the money that we receive and to grow it and to build it, not to give it away and trusting some third party. Oh, you deal with it, because there's a sign above your door that says charity. Why don't people understand Corinthians 1, 1 Corinthians 13, what charity truly is? They're supporting a wealth redistribution program. Very often these charities, the less fortunate. That's not even charitable to consider other people to be less fortunate just like that, simply because they are different. Oh, they have less money. They are less fortunate. Well, maybe they're more fortunate. How about that? Money can be a tremendous burden. The rich man will struggle to get into the kingdom of heaven, it says in the Bible. I suppose it is quite a distraction. Many people lust after money, and it's greatly considered in the world. But it's tricky stuff. It's tricky to have it, and it's tricky to give it away. So what should we do with it? Well, we invest it, or I'm speaking really as the body of believers, the church. Why don't you invest that money? And then when you start to accumulate a decent amount, you could perhaps employ a gardener, or you could fix that part of the church, and that you'll have to employ people to come and do that. Or perhaps you could build some accommodation and put it on the market, but do so based upon fair principles. I'm not saying charitable, but fairness. Be fair in the dealings, in the things that you're offering. And, of course, you will be caring because we are followers of Christ. We must house the widow and the fatherless. Not giving the money to Christian concern. That's pure conceit. And in the previous church, the garden was greatly in need of attention. It was absolutely disgraceful, the state it had come to. And there was nobody to do it. Most of the members of the congregation lived far away from the church. And I pitched in a couple of times, and they had no tools. And then the preacher bought some inappropriate tools. He was not a practical man at all. And I remember spending a day hacking away at stuff and doing this and that and trying to get it into shape. And it was suggested that, somebody knew a young man who did gardening, and why not ask him how much it would cost? They took a photograph of the area, and the quote came back for £200 to clear it up. Now, £200 for that work was a pittance, because you were looking, I would say, at about 3 days' work to do it properly. About 3 days' work. It was a very reasonable quote that they'd received, and they were just outraged that somebody would ask so much, and they refused to do it. But you see, if you've got a church fund and you're not giving it to some conceited charity, then you have the money to employ a young man to come and do some work on the garden, perhaps to do regular upkeep and keep the place looking a bit more tidy. That's a good use of your, collection money, isn't it? You're spreading the love around a little bit. Put some money back into the community. Now, I know a lot of churches will just build another church. That's the what do they call them? The Pentecostal people, because they get into the collecting money and investing money, and then it goes to their head, I think. I don't know quite what it is. We don't need any more churches. I mean, that's just not a requirement, because it's very well to gather in, a number of people, but we don't need to gather in these vast assemblies with amplifiers and everything to hear and to see. Even in the small church medium church that I have attended now a few times, the speaker comes up to the front, and there are a system of microphones, so his voice comes over the loudspeakers. And I find it very difficult to hear what he's actually saying. And most of the time I don't care, because I know that it will be nonsense. But sometimes I like to know what kind of nonsense I'm dealing with. Of course, there are some things that I would agree with. I'm being a little bit facetious, I suppose, but it's not clear over the stereo system, and you can watch him also on a television screen. He's videoed, and the pulpit, the old pulpit, which is about 5 or 6 feet above, or maybe not 6, but 5 foot perhaps above the pews, is unused. And there is a big Bible, I noticed, on the lectern in there, so I might creep up and see what that big Bible is. But if it's an authorized version, I shall be surprised, and I'll certainly let you know once I've established it. But it's just unused, you see. But really, that would be the place to stand, and you don't need a microphone. Stand there, speak clearly, read from the Bible, and then when you're tired, go down and have another fella come up and proceed from where you left off. How about that? Switch off the microphones and the television screen. Speak clearly, enunciate the Word of God clearly and the principles clearly, and read from the Bible, not from some wicked summary invented in the 1900s or thereafter. There were two different Bibles used at the service, two entirely different translations. How can you talk about the Word of God when you're doing that sort of thing? How can you remember it? The Bible never changes. That's another reason why we need to use the Authorized Version. It's so memorable. It's been spoken for hundreds of years. Anyway, those are my thoughts, apart from the stuff that they talk about up there, which you do have to wonder, because we're now coming up to Christian Aid Week, I suppose. This is why my mind has been drawn to charity and why it was mentioned quite a lot in the church service, with references to the widow and her mites and all the rest of it, and loving a cheerful giver and all those things. Dig. And then they're going to have Christian Aid Week, where they'll have a drive for a super collection, and maybe with specific special causes that they're going to support in their vanity. They don't support the local neighborhood. They don't support the local people. They don't support the needy in the area in any way at all. But they could do, you see, by injecting a bit of capital into the community and helping in that way. There is a need for dormitories, you could say. Maybe the church could help with that, you see, use their funds to do that. It used to be an old way of doing things, because at the same time, if you are truly big, doing something like that and using your amassed money to help people, then you're demonstrating the reality of Jesus Christ. You can't be sending that money off down to London and just hoping that some peer of the realm will know what to do with it. It's just abandonment of duty. And I am so critical of it in every single church that I've attended. And just using it to build some ostentatious new building to ram more people in on a Sunday, so that your collection goes up from the £1,200 that was boasted publicly in a Pentecostal church I attended many years ago, and becomes, 12 times £1,200, and then they just get involved in building and contracts, and the whole thing becomes a money thing. So these Pentecostal ministers end up being inordinately wealthy. It's a good little number. I suppose even in the Anglican Church they do okay. I mean, the minister really, he's an intermediary between the charities and their donator base. And the problem is that people don't think it through. You have to think it through and take responsibility for what you're doing. Not because you're being a good person, but because you're following a rational course of action. That's what it is. You're not necessarily trying to do good. I mean, honestly, you don't have to consciously try to do good. Even Jesus Christ said there is one good, and that is God. Why callest thou me good? But he said that, I think, actually because the Pharisee that had interrogated him called him good master. And whenever the word master is used, and this was referred to me by the preacher of the previous assembly, whenever the word master is used, it is a denigration of Jesus Christ, of course, and you can see it in the Bible, I think, quite often, that master and rabbi are used. They are showing unbelief. Jesus Christ is neither a master nor a rabbi. He is the Son of the living God. It's different. God bless.